What happens when everything you've been told about your enemy turns out to be a lie? In the caves of Okinawa, 1945, a starving Japanese soldier prepared to die rather than face the American white devils, until one of those demons did something that would shatter not just his worldview, but Japan's entire understanding of the war they could never win. April 23, 1945. Cave mouth, southern Okinawa. The grenade felt heavier than it should. Private First Class Kenji Sato's fingers, stick-thin and trembling, wrapped around the pineapple-textured surface of the Type 97 hand grenade. 4 pounds of cast iron and explosive. 4 seconds to oblivion. His thumb rested on the pin. Outside the cave, boots crunched on coral gravel. American voices, sharp, guttural, incomprehensible. Getting closer, Kenji squeezed his eyes shut. The cave smelled of bat guano, rotting seaweed, and his own dysentery. For 6 days he had hidden here, drinking rainwater that pooled in limestone depressions, eating nothing. His uniform, once the proud khaki of the Imperial Japanese Army, hung in strips from his skeletal frame. Blood from a shrapnel wound in his thigh had dried into a black crust that cracked when he moved. He was 20 years old. He would die at 20. This was better than the alternative. Lieutenant Nakamura had been explicit during the final briefing, shouting over the thunder of American naval guns that turned the sky orange every night. The Americans are not human. They are Kichiku-Bei Anglo-American devils. They will crush your bones under tank treads. They will torture you for sport. They will desecrate your body and send photographs to mock your family. Kenji had believed every word. Why wouldn't he? For 3 years since his conscription from a rice farm in Kumamoto Prefecture, every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every officer had repeated the same truth. Americans were monsters in human form, subhuman, demonic. The crunch of boots stopped. A shadow fell across the cave entrance, blocking the painful brightness of afternoon sun. "Hold it! Hands up!" The English words meant nothing to Kenji, but the tone meant everything. Command, authority, finality. His thumb began to pull the pin. Then the weakness came. The terrible, humiliating weakness of a body pushed past its limits. 6 days without food. 3 days of fever. His fingers spasmed. The grenade slipped from his grip, thudded onto the cave floor, rolled, didn't explode. Kenji collapsed. His vision tunneled. He pressed his forehead against the cool stone and waited for the bullet that would end this shameful failure. At least it would be quick. At least he wouldn't feel the tanks. Instead, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Not a blow, not a strike. A steadying grip, firm but not crushing. The hand of someone trying to keep another person from falling. Kenji forced his eyes open. His pupils adjusted to 6 days of cave darkness, screamed at the light. Gradually, the silhouette resolved into details. A man, young, perhaps 22, perhaps 23, tall, though everyone looked tall to Kenji's 5'4" frame, covered in coral dust and mud. A helmet with netting and a lieutenant's bar. Eyes the color of slate, ringed with exhaustion. Not a demon, not a devil, just tired. "Water?" the American said. The word was English, but the gesture was universal. A canteen held out, offered. Kenji flinched. Poison. It had to be poison. This was the torture Nakamura had described. First the false kindness, then the cruelty. The American seemed to understand the fear. He unscrewed the canteen cap, tilted it to his own lips, and drank. 3 swallows. Then he wiped the rim with his thumb and offered it again. The smell of clean water, chlorinated, metallic, clean, overwhelmed everything else. Kenji's body moved before his mind could catch up. He grabbed the canteen with both hands, tilted it back, and drank. Cool water, slightly chemical tasting but pure, flooded his mouth. He choked, coughed, drank again. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever tasted. The American waited. didn't rush him, didn't grab the canteen back, just crouched there on his haunches, watching with those slate-gray eyes. When Kenji finally lowered the canteen, half empty now, oh God, he'd been so selfish, drinking an enemy's water. The American did something that would echo through Kenji's mind for the next 60 years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Lucky Strike, the red circle logo visible even in the cave's dim light. He shook out 2 cigarettes, placed one between his own lips, and offered the other to Kenji. Kenji stared. His mind, trained by 3 years of military indoctrination, couldn't process what was happening. The demon was sharing. The subhuman monster was offering comfort. The American struck a match. The sulfur smell filled the cave. He lit his own cigarette first, then leaned forward and held the flame to Kenji's. Instinctively, Kenji inhaled. Smoke, harsh American tobacco, nothing like the milder Japanese kimchi he'd smoked before the war, filled his lungs. He coughed, but kept the cigarette between his lips. "War's over for you, buddy," the American said softly. His voice had gentled, not the command bark from before, just talking, like Kenji was a person. The American reached up and pulled something from inside his helmet, a photograph, creased and worn. He held it where Kenji could see. A girl, pretty with dark hair rolled in the fashion Kenji had seen in captured American magazines. She wore a light-colored dress and smiled at the camera with perfect white teeth. Behind her, tall buildings, a city. "See?" The American pointed at the photo, then at himself. "My girl. Chicago." Kenji knew Chicago. It was one of the few English words that had penetrated the propaganda, a city of gangsters and violence according to the radio broadcasts. But the girl in the photo didn't look like she lived in a hellscape. She looked happy. The American tucked the photo back into his helmet, then pulled a chocolate bar from his pack. He broke it in half, not metaphorically, but actually snapped the bar in 2 pieces, and handed one to Kenji. Chocolate, real chocolate. Kenji hadn't tasted chocolate since before the war, when his father had brought home a small bar from the city as a treat for Kenji's 16th birthday. The taste exploded on his tongue. Sweet, rich, impossibly luxurious. Tears welled in his eyes. The American smoked his cigarette and watched. Not with cruelty, not with superiority, with something that looked disturbingly like sympathy. "Corporal Williams," another voice deeper from outside the cave. "Got him?" "Yeah, Sarge," the American, Williams, called back. "He's in bad shape, need a stretcher." Stretcher. Kenji knew that word from his English language training. It meant they were going to carry him, not shoot him, not crush him under tanks. 2 more Americans appeared at the cave mouth. One, older with sergeant stripes, looked Kenji over with a practiced eye. "Jesus, kid's half dead. How long you been in here, son?" Kenji didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the same tone his own sergeant had used, back in training when a recruit collapsed from heat exhaustion. Concern, professional concern, but concern nonetheless. They brought the stretcher. Canvas and poles, pristine compared to the makeshift bamboo stretchers the Japanese army used. Williams stubbed out his cigarette and helped lift Kenji onto it. His hands, though rough with calluses, were gentle around the shrapnel wound. As they carried him into the sunlight, Kenji's propaganda-trained mind tried desperately to maintain its framework. This was a trick. This was the cruelty Nakamura had warned about. They were softening him up before the real torture began. But his eyes told a different story. The American position outside the cave wasn't the temporary, desperate encampment Kenji had expected. It was a city, tents in neat rows, supply dumps stacked with crates that stretched farther than he could see, trucks, dozens of trucks, all identical, all new, parked in precise lines, a field kitchen with actual metal stoves, not improvised fire pits. The smell of cooking meat, real meat, not the dried fish and rice that had constituted Japanese rations, drifted across the position. And everywhere, Americans, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all equipped identically, all well-fed, their uniforms clean despite the fighting. Some were shirtless, washing in water from canvas bags hung on poles, water used for washing, casually, as if water was infinite. Kenji's stretcher passed a supply dump. He turned his head, and his breath stopped. 50-gallon drums, fuel drums, painted olive drab, stenciled with U.S. Army in white letters. Not a few, not dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands, stacked 6 high, extending in rows that disappeared behind other supply dumps. Each drum represented more fuel than Kenji's entire battalion had received in the last 3 months. Next to the fuel drums, wooden crates, ammunition crates marked with calibers and lot numbers, mountains of them, casual, unstacked, just sitting there, as if bullets were so plentiful that organization didn't matter. And food. Dear God, the food. They passed a mess area where American soldiers sat on actual chairs at actual tables eating from metal trays. The portions Kenji's starving brain calculated automatically were 10 times what a Japanese soldier received on a good day. Meat, bread, some kind of yellow cake, oranges, fresh fruit here at the end of a 6,000-mile supply line. One American sat alone, reading a magazine. A magazine. Glossy, colorful, recent. The cover showed a baseball player. This soldier, this ordinary private, had mail delivery that included recreational reading material. Meanwhile, Kenji's last letter from home had arrived 9 months ago, water-stained and censored to illegibility. William set the stretcher down near a medical tent, a tent with a red cross. Kenji knew about the Red Cross. It meant doctors, medicine. The Japanese Army had Red Cross stations too, but their medicine consisted of bandages and alcohol when available. The American medical tent had everything. Through the open flap, Kenji saw shelves stocked with bottles, medicines, plasma, bandages in neat stacks, an actual operating table with an overhead light, clean white sheets, a generator humming in the background, powering the equipment. A medic approached, a different American, older, with glasses and a kind face. He knelt next to the stretcher and examined Kenji's wound without touching it first. Then he looked at Williams. 6 days without food, you said? Maybe longer. He's pretty far gone. The medic nodded and called to someone else. Bring a glucose IV and sulfa for that leg. Glucose, IV, sulfa, words Kenji recognized from medical training, advanced medicine, the kind of medicine Japanese field hospitals had run out of in 1943. The medic prepared a needle. Kenji tensed. Was this finally the torture? But the insertion was quick and professional. Cool liquid began flowing into his arm. Glucose. They were feeding him intravenously because he was too weak to eat solid food. The demons were caring for him with medicine that cost money, American money. William squatted next to the stretcher one more time. He pulled out his cigarettes again and placed the entire pack in Kenji's hand. Then he stood, gave a small nod, and walked away to rejoin his unit. Kenji lay on the stretcher, IV in his arm, Lucky Strikes clutched in his hand, and stared at the American encampment. The propaganda fortress in his mind began to crack, not dramatically, not all at once, but crack by crack, piece by piece. These weren't demons. They were men. Tired men, young men, men with girlfriends in Chicago and a love of baseball. Men who shared their water, their cigarettes, their chocolate, and they had everything. The Arithmetic of Impossibility. By the time Kenji was well enough to be transferred to the prisoner of war camp, at the end of the week he had been able to observe and count and calculate. A Japanese infantry division at full strength had 16,000 men. They were supplied by a logistics train that struggled to deliver 30 tons of materiel per day across the few dozen miles of intact road on Okinawa. The American division camped around his medical tent had 15,000 men. Their supply deliveries, which Kenji watched with increasing horror from his hospital bed, arrived continuously. LST landing ships beached every 6 hours, dropping ramps and disgorging trucks that drove directly into the supply dumps. Forklifts, machines Kenji had only seen in industrial photographs, moved pallets of goods with casual efficiency. He tried to count the trucks on one afternoon and gave up at 200. A prisoner next to him, a corporal from the artillery corps who spoke some English, had been talking to a guard. The corporal translated what he'd learned, his voice hollow with disbelief. The Americans said their division receives 500 tons of supplies per day. 500. I told him that was impossible. He laughed and said that was the minimum. On heavy fighting days, they get 1,000 tons. 500 tons every day for one division. Kenji did the mathematics. Japan's entire logistical capacity across the Pacific Theater, according to his officer training lectures, was approximately 10,000 tons per day, total, for every division, every ship, every airfield. The Americans were moving 50 times that much. Maybe 100 times, maybe more. The corporal continued, his voice shaking. The guard showed me a requisition form, just a form for one battalion, toothbrushes, 500 toothbrushes, just listed casually like they're more worried about dental hygiene than we are about artillery shells. Another prisoner, a Navy lieutenant who'd been shot down and captured, added his own observation. I saw their aircraft carriers from the air before I crashed. I counted 7 carriers just here at Okinawa. We had 2 carriers left in the entire Imperial Navy. 7 carriers. The lieutenant's words hung in the sick bay like smoke. Kenji thought of the stories from his training. The officers had said that Japan's spiritual strength would overcome America's material weakness, that one Japanese soldier, filled with Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan, could defeat 10 Americans. That American soldiers were soft, spoiled, afraid of death. But Williams hadn't looked soft. He'd looked tired and competent and well supplied. And most importantly, Williams had looked kind despite having every tactical reason to be cruel. The shock of civilization. The POW camp at Ishikawa, northern Okinawa, completed Kenji's education in the arithmetic of American power. 20,000 Japanese prisoners, tent cities organized in numbered blocks, with latrines, running water, and daily food deliveries. 3 meals a day, not Japanese-sized portions, but American-sized portions. 1,200 calories at breakfast, 1,500 at lunch, 1,800 at dinner. More food in one day than a Japanese frontline soldier received in 3. Medical care, a full field hospital with 20 doctors, 40 nurses, unlimited supplies. Prisoners who arrived with tropical diseases, malnutrition, wounds festering from weeks of neglect, all treated. Some died, yes, but from the severity of their conditions, not from neglect. The American doctors tried to save everyone. There was a library in a prisoner of war camp, stocked with books in Japanese. Where had they gotten Japanese books? Who had thought to include that in the logistics planning? What kind of military included library services for enemy prisoners in their operational requirements? Kenji spent his first month in camp simply trying to reconcile what he saw with what he'd been taught. The propaganda had said Americans were cruel, but the guards, while firm, were not sadistic. They followed rules. When a guard was accused of striking a prisoner, he was removed and disciplined. Removed and disciplined for hitting an enemy. The propaganda had said Americans were racist, but the medical staff treated Japanese prisoners the same as they treated American wounded, the same morphine, the same surgeries, the same clean sheets. The propaganda had said Americans were weak, But every American soldier Kenji encountered had good teeth, clear eyes, well-fitted uniforms, and the casual confidence of men who knew their logistics would never fail them. In the 4th month of his captivity, something happened that shattered the last remnants of Kenji's indoctrination. An American education officer, a major who spoke fluent Japanese, organized a screening of an American film. Not a propaganda film, an entertainment film. He called it Going My Way, a story about a priest and a church in America. Kenji attended mostly out of boredom. He expected crude propaganda. What he got instead was a revelation. The film showed America, not a military America, but a civilian America. City streets full of cars, not military trucks, but private cars, owned by ordinary people. Buildings tall as mountains, electric lights everywhere, children in clean clothes playing in parks, a church with a choir and an organ and stained glass windows. One scene showed the priest character sitting down to dinner. The table had roasted chicken, potatoes, bread with butter, vegetables, a pie. This was meant to be a humble meal for a humble priest, a simple dinner. It was more food than Kenji's family had seen in a month before he was conscripted. And this was supposed to be normal, ordinary. The film presented this abundance as unremarkable, as the baseline condition of American life. After the film ended, Kenji sat in his tent and tried to understand what he'd seen. Japan had told him they were fighting a war against an America weakened by decadence, corrupted by luxury, teetering on collapse. The officers had said that American civilians were on the edge of starvation, that their economy was buckling, that one more push would break them. But Going My Way had been filmed in 1944, last year, at the height of the Pacific War, and it showed an America that was fine, better than fine, prosperous, making entertainment films about singing priests while simultaneously building 7 aircraft carriers. A terrible understanding began to dawn. Japan hadn't been fighting a war it could lose. Japan had been fighting a war it could never, under any circumstances, win. The truth about rice. In the 6th month of his captivity, Kenji was selected for a work detail. The Americans needed labor to build a new section of camp, and they asked for volunteers. The pay was 10 cents per day in scrip, redeemable for cigarettes, candy, and personal items at the camp store. 10 cents. The Americans were paying enemy prisoners to work, not forcing, paying. Kenji volunteered, partly for the cigarettes, partly for something to do. The work detail was supervised by a sergeant named McKenna, a large red-faced man from Pennsylvania who spoke no Japanese but communicated effectively through gestures and patience. McKenna taught Kenji and the other prisoners how to mix concrete, lay foundation stones, and frame tent platforms. One afternoon, during a break, McKenna shared his lunch. He divided his sandwich in half and gave one portion to Kenji without being asked. The sandwich had white bread, canned meat, cheese, lettuce, and some kind of sauce. McKenna ate his half in 4 bites and washed it down with Coca-Cola from a bottle. Kenji ate his half slowly, trying to understand. The sandwich, just a lunch for one sergeant on one work detail, contained more protein than a Japanese soldier's weekly rice ration. That night, back in his tent, Kenji finally spoke the thought that had been growing in his mind for 6 months. "We were told the Americans were starving," he said to his tent mates. 8 men, all veterans, all gradually recovering from wounds and malnutrition. "We were told their economy was collapsing. We were told they couldn't sustain a war." A former captain, a man named Yoshida, who'd lost an arm at Iwo Jima, looked up from the book he was reading, another book from the camp library, a translation of an American novel about farms. "Yes," he said quietly, "we were told many things." "But it's all backward," Kenji continued. "It's all backward. They're not starving. We're starving. They're not weak. We're weak. They're not cruel. We're—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Yoshida finished it for him. "We're the ones who told our soldiers to die rather than surrender. We're the ones who sent men into battle with 3 bullets and a prayer. We're the ones who believed that spirit could defeat steel." Another prisoner, a young private named Tanaka, spoke up. "My brother wrote me a letter before he died at Saipan. He said the Americans used flamethrowers to clear the caves. Do you know what the Americans called it? Waste of fuel. They complained about wasting fuel. We were rationing bullets and they were complaining about having too much fuel." The tent fell silent. Outside, the sounds of the American camp continued. Generators humming, trucks moving, guards changing shifts with mechanical precision. "I watched them build a road last week," another prisoner said, "start to finish in 3 days. Graded, graveled, rolled flat. 3 days. They have machines for everything. Graders, rollers, trucks that dump gravel automatically. We were building roads by hand with shovels. And they have machines." Yoshida closed his book. "My wife wrote me before I was captured. She said rice rations in Tokyo had been cut to 1 cup per day. 1 cup for an entire day. And here the Americans feed us 3 meals plus snacks. We, the enemy prisoners, eat better than our own families in Japan." Kenji felt something break inside him. Not violently, just break, like a rope that's been fraying and finally gives way. "We never had a chance," he said. "Did we? We never at any point had a chance to win." No one answered. They didn't need to. The education of prisoners. The American education program intensified in the 7th month. The major who'd shown going my way began giving lectures, voluntary lectures, which prisoners could attend or skip. Kenji attended. The major, whose name was Harper, had studied at Tokyo Imperial University before the war. He spoke Japanese like a native with the Kansai accent that reminded Kenji of home. Major Harper's first lecture was about economics. He used a chalkboard and brought actual statistics. Before the war, Harper began, writing figures on the board. The United States produced 190 million tons of steel per year. Japan produced 7 million tons. For every ton of steel Japan produced, America produced 27 tons. The prisoners sat silent. They'd never been told this. Harper continued. Oil production, America, 1.7 billion barrels per year. Japan, essentially zero. You imported everything, and when we cut off that supply in 1941, your strategic position became untenable. A prisoner raised his hand. But we were told America was soft, that Americans wouldn't fight, that we could win through superior spirit. Harper nodded, not unkindly. Yes, your government told you that. But think about what you've seen here. Do the American soldiers you've met seem unwilling to fight? Silence. Because no, the Americans didn't seem unwilling. They seemed tired, but determined, efficient, professional. Let me show you something else, Harper said. He unfolded a map, a huge map of the Pacific covering the whole wall. In June 1942, after Midway, the United States Navy had 3 operational carriers. By June 1945, last month, we had 99 carriers. 99. We built 96 carriers in 3 years. 96 carriers. Kenji tried to imagine the industrial capacity, the shipyards, the workers, the steel required to build 96 aircraft carriers. His mind couldn't grasp it. Your government knew this, Harper said, his voice gentle but firm. The Emperor's advisors knew this. They knew the production statistics. They knew about American industrial capacity, and they sent you to fight anyway. Another prisoner, an older sergeant, stood up angrily. Are you saying our sacrifices were meaningless, that we died for nothing? Harper's face softened. No, Sergeant. I'm saying your government sacrificed you for a war they knew was unwinnable. Your courage, your sacrifice, that was real. Your leader's honesty with you, that was not. The sergeant sat down slowly. Harper continued with more statistics. Food production, electrical generation, railroad capacity, radio ownership, telephone lines, literacy rates. Every metric told the same story. America's economy had been, before the war, approximately 20 times larger than Japan's. 20 times. Kenji thought about Williams offering him chocolate, not special officers' chocolate, just chocolate, the kind American soldiers carried casually, because chocolate was so common in America that it could be made into rations. Here's what I want you to understand, Harper said, erasing the board and writing one sentence. You were lied to. Your government told you America was weak. Lie. They told you Americans were cowards. Lie. They told you we were on the verge of collapse. Lie. They told you that we would torture prisoners. Lie. He paused. The question is, why did they lie? No one answered. Harper answered his own question. Because if they'd told you the truth, that you were fighting an enemy with 20 times your industrial capacity, unlimited resources, and the will to use them, you would have known the war was hopeless, and they needed you to fight anyway. The weight of understanding Kenji lay awake that night, staring at the canvas ceiling of his tent. Next to him, Yoshida was also awake. Kenji could tell from his breathing. I keep thinking about my family, Kenji said quietly. My mother, my little sister, still in Kumamoto, probably starving while the government tells them victory is near. Yoshida rolled over. My wife's last letter said Tokyo was being firebombed every week. The government told people to fight the fires with bamboo spears and sand buckets. Bamboo spears against incendiary bombs from B-29s. Do you think they know? Kenji asked. The people in Japan, do they know we've already lost? Some must know, Yoshida said, but knowing and accepting are different things. Accepting means admitting that everything we were told, everything we believed, was false. That's harder than facing bombs. Kenji thought about Lieutenant Nakamura's final briefing, the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that dying was better than surrendering to demons. Nakamura believed it, Kenji said. He really believed Americans were devils. He wasn't lying to us. He believed the lies himself. That's how propaganda works, Yoshida replied. The most effective lies are the ones the liars believe. Silence. Then Kenji asked the question that had been haunting him. How do we go home after this? How do we go back to Japan and live among people who still believe the lies? Yoshida had no answer. The day the war ended, August 15th, 1945. The camp loudspeakers crackled to life at noon. Major Harper's voice speaking in careful Japanese. Will all prisoners please assemble at the Central Parade Ground? The Emperor will address the nation by radio. The Emperor, speaking by radio. This was unprecedented. Divine emperors did not speak on radio like common politicians. 20,000 prisoners gathered in the sun. The Americans had set up speakers connected to a shortwave radio. Static hissed and popped. Then, after a long moment, a high-pitched, formal voice began speaking. The Emperor's voice. Thin, reedy, using court Japanese so formal that many prisoners struggled to understand every word. But the meaning was clear. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The Emperor's euphemistic announcement of surrender. We have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all generations to come, by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. Defeat. Total defeat. The surrender of Japan. Some prisoners wept, others stood frozen, a few collapsed. Kenji simply stood and listened, feeling something like relief mixed with profound shame. The war was over. He would live. He would see his family again, but he would return to a Japan that had been gutted by lies. After the broadcast ended, Major Harper stepped forward. His face was serious but not triumphant. "Gentlemen," he said in Japanese, "the war is over. You will be repatriated as quickly as shipping allows. This may take weeks or months, but you will go home." A prisoner shouted, "To what? To ruins? To starvation?" Harper nodded slowly. "Yes, Japan has been badly damaged, but it will rebuild, and you will help rebuild it. That's your task now, to take what you've learned here and help your country become something new." Kenji thought about that. What had he learned here? He'd learned that Americans weren't demons. He'd learned that material resources mattered more than spiritual strength. He'd learned that propaganda could convince an entire nation to fight an unwinnable war. But most importantly, he'd learned that the enemy could be merciful, that even in war, humanity could persist, that a Marine from Chicago could offer a cigarette to a starving enemy, and in that moment be more human than all the propaganda on both sides. Epilogue: The Cigarette's Legacy. Kenji Sato returned to Japan in February 1946. His village in Kumamoto had been spared the worst of the firebombing, but the poverty was absolute. His mother had survived on radish leaves and rice husks. His little sister, now 12, looked like she was 8. He gave them everything he'd saved from his prisoner's wages, $2 in scrip, converted to occupation yen. It bought a week of rice. But what Kenji carried home that was truly valuable wasn't money, it was understanding. In 1947, when the American occupation forces began hiring translators, Kenji applied. His English was rudimentary, but his experience in the POW camp counted for something. He was hired as a liaison between American advisors and Japanese local government. He saw up close how the Americans rebuilt Japan, the Marshall Plan, the new Constitution, the land reforms, the investment in infrastructure, schools, hospitals. It wasn't charity. The Americans had strategic interests, but it was generous beyond what any Japanese propagandist had ever predicted. By 1952, when the occupation ended, Kenji had become an advocate for Japanese-American friendship. He gave talks at schools, wrote articles for newspapers, told his story to anyone who would listen. "I was taught to hate Americans," he would say. "I was taught they were demons. And then a demon offered me a cigarette and showed me a photo of his girl and treated me like a human being. In that moment, I learned that propaganda dies when it meets reality." He kept one thing from the war: the Lucky Strike pack that Williams had given him, empty now but preserved. He would show it to his children and later his grandchildren and tell them the story. "This," he would say, holding up the red and white pack, "is worth more than all the weapons Japan built during the war, because this cigarette represented something our military never understood, that strength without humanity is just brutality. But humanity backed by strength can rebuild the world." By the time Kenji Sato died in 2007, at age 82, Japan had become the world's second-largest economy. The alliance between Japan and America had become one of the strongest in the world. The demons of 1945 had become partners, friends, allies, and sometimes late at night, Kenji would take out that yellowed Lucky Strike pack and remember a cave on Okinawa. The moment when everything he believed shattered. The moment when an enemy became a savior. The moment when war ended and humanity began. The war had taught Japan many lessons, but perhaps the most important one was this: you cannot defeat an enemy whose strength is matched by their mercy, because mercy, in the end, conquers more surely than any bomb. The cigarette Lieutenant Williams offered Private Kenji Sato in April 1945 cost approximately 2 cents. It bought understanding worth more than all the war's treasure. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the weight of history, and sometimes the enemy who shows you kindness teaches you more than all your leaders ever could.